There is a painting in a chapel in Rome in which a beam of light enters a dark room at an angle so precise and so specific that art historians have spent 4 centuries arguing about where it is coming from. The figures in the room are dressed not in the robes of antiquity, but in the clothes of the street, the kind of clothes you would have seen on anyone in Rome in the year 1600. A group of men sits around a table, probably counting money. One of them is pointing at himself in apparent disbelief. Another is hunched over the coins, ignoring what is happening. The light catches their faces with a violence that is simultaneously beautiful and slightly merciless, as though it does not care what it illuminates. It simply illuminates. The painting is called The Calling of St. Matthew. It was made by Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio, and it hangs today in the Contarelli Chapel in the Church of San Luigi dei Francesi in Rome, where it has been since 1600. There is one thing that nobody who stands in front of it today has ever been able to determine, despite 400 years of scholarship, close looking, and sustained argument. Which man in the painting is Matthew? The title names the subject. The subject is present, and after 4 centuries, no one can agree on which one he is. But that is not the most extraordinary thing about this painting, or about the man who made it. In May of 1606, 6 years after completing The Calling of St. Matthew, Caravaggio killed a man in a brawl in Rome. He fled the city with a death sentence on his head, spent the last 4 years of his life as a fugitive, moving through Malta, Sicily, and Naples, and produced, during those years, some of the most devastating paintings in Western art. He was 38 years old when he died in 1610, alone, on a beach north of Rome. The circumstances still unclear. The papal pardon that might have allowed him to return to the city had been issued. He never received it in time. Once you know this, the paintings look different, not worse, not romanticized, different in the way that a very bright light looks different when you understand something about where it is coming from. The mystery inside the painting. Return to the calling of St. Matthew and the question of which figure is being called. The Gospel of Matthew describes the scene simply. Jesus passed a tax collector named Matthew sitting at his work and said, "Follow me." Matthew rose and followed. The scene has been painted before and since. It is one of the standard moments in the New Testament cycle. And in most versions, the identification is made clear by label, by halo, by position, or by some combination of visual cues that remove ambiguity. Caravaggio removed all of it. There are 5 figures at the table. Christ stands at the right edge of the painting, or rather, Christ's arm extends from the right edge, accompanied by another figure who is likely Peter. And the hand points across the room in the gesture that Caravaggio appears to have lifted directly from Michelangelo's creation of Adam on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. The gesture is unmistakable. What it is pointing at is not. The figure at the far left of the table, a bearded older man in a feathered hat, his head bowed over the coins, seems like an obvious candidate for Matthew. He is prominent, he is at the end of the group nearest to the door, and his downward gaze could represent absorption in the worldly work he is about to be called away from. For most of the painting's history, he was the consensus answer. Then, in the 20th century, art historians began arguing for the young man in the center of the composition instead, a figure who is looking up, who appears to be reacting to the light and the gesture, whose expression might be the one of disbelief described in the text. Under this reading, the old man's pointing at himself is not self-indication but confusion. He is gesturing at the young man beside him, as if to say, "Him? You mean him?" Both readings are defensible. Neither has been settled. Caravaggio, who could have made this easy, chose not to. He painted the moment of calling with such specificity of light and such ambiguity of response that the painting has been generating the argument for 400 years. Some historians believe this was deliberate, that the unresolved identity of Matthew is the point, forcing the viewer into the scene, making them ask which one they would be. Who he was, Michelangelo Merisi was born in 1571, probably in Milan, though he was associated early in his life with the nearby town of Caravaggio, from which he took the name by which history knows him. He arrived in Rome in the early 1590s, poor and without significant connections, and worked his way into the studio system of the city through a combination of technical brilliance and a personality that his contemporaries described as volatile, quarrelsome, and prone to violence. He was involved in numerous street brawls and minor legal incidents throughout his career in Rome. He was not peaceful by nature. What he brought to painting was something that had no real precedent. The tradition he inherited depicted sacred subjects, Christ, the apostles, the saints, the biblical episodes, using idealized human figures derived from classical sculpture. The bodies were perfect, the faces were serene or heroically suffering. The settings were timeless and unlocalized. The message was, these events took place outside ordinary human experience, at a level of spiritual elevation to which the viewer might aspire but could not claim. Caravaggio looked at this tradition and declined it. He painted real people, people from the streets of Rome, people with dirty fingernails and worn faces, and the specific, unremarkable bodies of people who worked and aged and did not correspond to any classical ideal. When he painted Matthew, he gave him a tax collector's face. When he painted the Virgin Mary, he used the body of a drowned woman pulled from the Tiber, and the church that commissioned the work refused to accept it because the sacred subject looked too much like a corpse. He also did something to light that no one had done before, or not at this scale, not with this commitment. He eliminated the ambient illumination that traditional painting used to make everything visible and replaced it with a single, directional source, a beam that fell on some things and left others in total darkness. The technique is called chiaroscuro, and Caravaggio did not invent it, but he radicalized it into something that looked like nothing that had come before. His shadows are not gradations, they are absences. His light does not illuminate so much as select, cutting across a scene and leaving the rest to disappear. The effect is that you look at his paintings the way you look at something you have almost walked past in a dark room. A sudden recognition, a catching of breath, an awareness that you could have missed this entirely. The murder. On the evening of May 28, 1606, in a field outside Rome near the Via della Scrofa, Caravaggio was involved in a brawl that ended with a man named Ranuccio Tomassoni dying from a wound to his leg. The exact circumstances remain debated. Some historians have argued the killing was accidental, that a wound intended to maim struck the femoral artery. Others have proposed it was deliberate, the result of a long-running dispute over gambling debts, or over a woman, or over both. Tomassoni was not without enemies. Caravaggio was not without enemies. The specifics of what happened in the field that evening are not recoverable. What is recoverable is what followed. The governor of Rome issued a capital conviction, a bando capitale, which authorized anyone to kill Caravaggio on sight and claim a reward. He fled the city within days, leaving behind his workshop, his patrons, his unfinished commissions, and the career he had spent 15 years constructing. He was 34 years old. He had perhaps 4 years to live. The fugitive paintings. What Caravaggio made during those 4 years constitutes, by the judgment of most art historians who have studied them, the most psychologically intense body of work in his already intense career. He went first to the Alban Hills south of Rome, then to Naples, then to Malta, where he was received by the Knights of St. John, and painted one of his most celebrated works, the Beheading of St. John the Baptist, completed in 1608 for the oratory of the Co-Cathedral in Valletta. It is the only painting he ever signed. He wrote his name in the blood of the executed saint, in the lower left of the canvas, a detail so deliberate and so strange that it has generated its own substantial critical literature. In Malta, he was made a Knight of the Order, an honor that also offered legal protection, and might, in time, have helped secure his pardon from Rome. Within months, he had committed another violent offense, the nature of which was not recorded with the precision historians would prefer, and was imprisoned. He escaped, returned to Naples, and continued painting. In Naples, Sicily, and the period of his continuing flight, he produced works in which the darkness is more total than in anything he had made before, and the light more isolated. The figures in the late paintings emerge from shadows that feel less like compositional choices and more like a description of the condition he was living in. Everything reduced to a face caught in light, everything else falling away. The David with the head of Goliath from this period has Goliath's severed head bearing, by general consensus of those who have studied it, Caravaggio's own features. A man who had killed was painting himself as the thing that had been killed. The death. In 1610, a papal pardon was arranged through the intercession of several powerful patrons who had never stopped wanting Caravaggio's work. He loaded paintings onto a boat north of Naples, works he intended to deliver in exchange for the restoration of his standing, and traveled toward Rome. He came ashore at Porto Ercole, a small town on the Tuscan coast, and died there on July 18, 1610. The cause was recorded as fever. Whether it was malaria, heat stroke, an infected wound, or something else. The documents do not resolve. He was 38. The pardon had been issued. It arrived days after his death. The paintings he had put on the boat may have arrived without him, or may have been lost. The record is incomplete. What survived is what he had already delivered, a body of work that had changed the course of European painting before he was 35, and that he continued producing, fugitive, convicted, dangerous, until the last possible moment. What the violence and the art share. I want to offer a reading of Caravaggio that does not separate his life from his work, because I think they are not separable, and I think understanding why is the most interesting thing about him. What Caravaggio refused, in both his art and his life, was the managed distance that convention required. The convention of his era required that sacred subjects be elevated above ordinary experience, that you look at them with reverence and from below, across a gap that keeps the divine separate from the human. He collapsed that gap. He put dirty feet and tax collector faces into the sacred stories. He made Christ look like someone you might see in a Roman market. This was theologically provocative and aesthetically radical. And it was also the work of a man who could not, or would not, maintain the conventional distance between the thing being depicted and the reality it was drawn from. That same inability, or refusal, appears in his life. The brawls, the arrests, the killing in the field, these are the actions of a man who repeatedly collapsed the distance between himself and whatever was in front of him. He did not manage situations. He entered them. His contemporaries noted that he carried a sword at all times, that he was quickly offended, that he responded to insult with physical directness. He was not separate from the things that happened around him in the way that conventional social behavior required. The light in Caravaggio's paintings does not diffuse. It does not create a general warmth in which everything is softened and made comfortable. It lands where it lands with the indifference of something that follows its own logic, and what it reveals completely. The shadows keep everything else. There is no managed middle ground, no compromise between visibility and darkness. This is also a description of Caravaggio himself. That is not a romantic excuse for violence. It is an observation about the relationship between what an artist refuses in their work and what they refuse in their life. He refused idealization in both places, with the same completeness, at the same cost. The paintings exist because of that refusal. The death sentence existed because of that refusal. Both of them are his. I'd love to know what you think. Looking at the calling of St. Matthew, which figure do you believe Christ is pointing at? And does it change anything to know that the painting was made by a man who would kill someone 6 years later and spend the rest of his life running? Let me know in the comments. I genuinely love to hear where you land.